What happens when a prince known for avoiding drama sits across from a host who thrives on stirring it up? Tonight, we take you inside how a simple, polite chat on the Graham Norton show quickly spiraled into a full-blown televised mess. Prince Harry, usually calm and collected, lost his cool under the hot lights of live TV. Stick around, this clash only gets more intense. It all began like any other charming late-night segment. But by the end, pure chaos. Before jumping to conclusions, make sure you catch every sharp remark that led to Harry's breaking point. This wasn't just another royal sit-down, it was a public reckoning. That night, the studio buzzed with energy. The iconic red couch glowed under the stage lights, while the audience buzzed with anticipation. Graham Norton, right at home, sipped water and scanned his cards. That classic playful smirk sat firmly on his face. Everything was set for another fun night. Then Prince Harry stepped onto the stage, greeted by deafening applause. He wore a sharp navy suit, crisp white shirt, and skipped the tie, his usual mix of laid-back and royal. Flashing the familiar grin that once made him one of the most beloved royals, he waved and took his place on the far side of the couch. Graham welcomed him warmly, adjusting his cue cards as the cheers died down. "Your Royal Highness," he said, smiling. "We don't often have true royalty on this couch. How are you doing these days?" Harry gave a polite chuckle. "I'm well, Graham. Thank you. Staying busy, working on mental health, veterans support, and just trying to live a bit more quietly now." The audience applauded again. Graham gave a thoughtful nod, his eyes twinkling with interest. "Ah, yes, privacy," he said. "We'll come back to that. I imagine it's hard to stay private when the entire world knows your face. But first," Graham continued, "let's talk about your recent projects. You've got a documentary coming out, right?" Harry gave a small smile and nodded, describing the importance of giving veterans and underrepresented voices a platform. He spoke well, and the audience responded positively. For those first few minutes, everything went smoothly. Graham tossed in some gentle jokes, and Harry played along. Laughter echoed through the studio. But then Graham's tone shifted. The questions became more direct. With a smile still on his face, but a sharper edge to his voice, Graham asked, "You and Meghan stepping back from the royal family. Sorry, is it stepping away or stepping out? I can't keep up. What would you call it?" Harry's jaw tightened slightly, though he kept smiling. "We just wanted to focus on our family and our work. That's all. Nothing mysterious." "Of course," Graham replied lightly. "But you do realize, to most people, it looked like you ran away. One day you're a prince, the next, a Californian with a Netflix contract. Was that the plan all along?" The audience chuckled, though it wasn't clear if they were meant to. Harry's face tensed. "It's not running away if you're leaving something that's become toxic," he responded firmly. Graham raised an eyebrow, keeping a calm expression. "Toxic," he repeated, tapping his cards. "That word gets thrown around a lot. Toxic press, toxic palace, toxic traditions. Was there anything about royal life that you actually liked?" Harry leaned back, arms crossed, his tone noticeably cooler. "That's not a fair question. I served my country and my family for years. But when it started hurting the people I care about, it was time to go." Graham pushed further. "Hurting because of the media? Or the family itself?" Harry's voice dropped slightly. "Both." The mood in the room shifted. The audience could feel the tension building. Graham, still unfazed, flipped his card again. "Let's talk about Meghan. Some people say she never really fit into the royal family. Some even claim she expected that and had a plan from the start. What's your response to that?" Harry's smile vanished. He stared directly at Graham. "That's ridiculous. And frankly, an absurd question." Graham laughed lightly and raised his hands. "No offense meant. I'm just bringing up what people say." Harry leaned forward slightly. Maybe people shouldn't speak about things they don't understand. The room grew uneasy. Graham noticed, but kept going. Of course. But let's be real. You left the country, distanced yourself from your family, yet still appear on magazine covers and television. If privacy is what you wanted, why not quietly step away? That was the first moment Harry's calm started to crack. He let out a dry laugh, but it lacked warmth. You really don't get it, do you? He said, his voice sharp with frustration. Graham tilted his head. Oh, I think I do. But I'd like to hear you explain it. Harry's eyes sparked with anger. It's not about disappearing. It's about owning our story, telling it ourselves before people like you twist it into something cruel. Graham leaned back, steepling his fingers. Ah. So people like me are the problem. Harry didn't answer. The studio fell silent, every eye locked on the two men as the room grew hotter, figuratively and literally. And that was just the beginning. The audience barely moved. Even the studio lights felt hotter. Prince Harry sat stiffly on the red couch, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the armrest. Meanwhile, Graham Norton stayed perfectly composed, relaxed, confident, like someone who had been through plenty of tense interviews before. But he knew exactly what kind of fire he was playing with, and he kept striking matches. Well, Graham said, after a short pause, his smile polite but his eyes full of challenge. You've made it very clear you want to control your own story, Harry. But don't you see how it looks a little contradictory? You ask for privacy, yet here you are on my show, in front of millions, promoting your book, your documentary, your podcast. It's all pretty public, isn't it? Harry's upper lip curled slightly. There's a big difference between telling your own story and letting the press lie about it. Graham leaned forward just a little, voice calm but probing. But doesn't telling your story open the door to even more scrutiny? The more you reveal, the more people question. You can't expect everyone to just take your version as truth, can you? Harry's gaze narrowed. You mean your version? Graham let out a small chuckle. I don't have a version, Your Highness. I have questions. Then came a flash of red in Harry's face, frustration boiling over. And those same questions have followed us for years. People like you don't care about answers. You just want a headline. The audience stirred again, the tension wrapping tighter around the room. Graham pressed his fingertips together. All right then, he said. Let's try this. You've said publicly that Meghan didn't receive the support she needed from the royal family while living in the UK. What exactly were you expecting from them? What help did you ask for that they refused? Harry exhaled sharply through his nose. I expected them to protect her the way they've protected others. I wanted her to be treated like family. He paused, his voice rising slightly. And they didn't. They didn't, he snapped. Next question. Graham raised an eyebrow but didn't hesitate. Fine. You've also claimed racism played a major role in your decision to leave the country. But many people believe the criticism Meghan faced was more about her actions than her background. Are you sure it's fair to label it all as racism? Harry's head pulled back like he'd been slapped. Excuse me? He asked, his tone ice cold. It's just a question, Graham replied, staying steady. Some think you've used accusations of racism to silence real criticism. Can you see how it might seem that way to others? Now Harry leaned forward, his voice louder, angrier. No, Graham. What I see is someone trying to defend prejudice by calling it opinion. There was a collective gasp from the audience. Graham didn't flinch. Of course, he said. But isn't it dangerous to say every negative comment is racist? Sometimes people just don't like you or your choices. That doesn't always mean prejudice, does it? Harry's stare sharpened into a glare. You're walking a thin line, Graham. A very thin line. Graham's smile tightened, turning colder. I walk that same line with every guest, Harry. I ask what people at home are already wondering. If those questions upset you, maybe that says more about the answers than it does about me. The space between them crackled. Other guests on the sofa had all but vanished into the background, clearly uncomfortable. The audience, once laughing and lively, was now dead quiet, hanging on every word. Graham continued after a long silence. You've called the royal family an institution. Some say that sounds cold, considering they're your own flesh and blood. Is there still love there? Or is it all just duty now? Harry's nostrils flared, his fingers digging into the couch cushion. I love my family, he said, slow and controlled. But love isn't enough when loyalty only goes one way. Interesting, Graham murmured. Do you think they feel the same about you? That maybe you've been disloyal to them? Harry turned sharply toward him. You don't know them. You don't know me. So don't pretend you do. Graham's tone stayed light but firm. I'm only asking what millions of people already think. Harry shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You're not asking, you're accusing. That's what you do. You hide mockery and judgment under the cover of entertainment. For a moment, Graham's famous grin faded. He replied softly, but clearly. Entertainment and journalism aren't the same, but they don't have to be opposites either. Harry's voice suddenly rose, frustration cracking his calm. You think this is journalism? You think dragging people onto your sofa and tearing them apart is journalism? Harry, Graham began, trying to keep control of the moment. No. Harry cut him off, sharp and direct. Don't harry me. You sit there with your cards and your smirk and act like this is all a game. But it's not. You are hurting people. You're just too smug to see it. The words landed hard, echoing through the studio. For the first time, Graham's face tightened, the tension now shared between them. For the first time that night, Graham Norton's calm expression shifted. He leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Prince Harry. His voice dropped, quiet but edged with steel. And you, he said evenly, you think because you've gone through pain, you're above being questioned. But you're not. You came here knowing the kinds of things we'd discuss. And now that the questions are uncomfortable, you're showing exactly why people think you can't handle them. Harry didn't move. His eyes burned with fury, his breathing faster now. The audience sat frozen, not a whisper in the air. His hands trembled slightly in his lap, and for a moment, it looked like he might stand up and leave right then. But he didn't, at least, not yet. The studio remained completely still, time seeming to freeze. Everyone was watching, waiting. The cameras kept rolling. Harry's jaw tightened, his breath shallow and quick. The other guests on the couch glanced nervously at each other, clearly unsure what to do. They looked like they'd rather disappear into the cushions than stay in that spotlight. Then, Graham finally spoke again, his voice measured but piercing. You seem upset, he said softly, each word deliberate like a scalpel. Harry's head snapped toward him, his eyes blazing. Upset? You think this is upset? He hissed. You sit there, Graham, making these little digs at me, at my wife, at my family, and you think I don't notice? You think I don't understand what you're really doing? Still, Graham's expression remained composed. And what exactly am I doing? You're making a spectacle out of me, Harry said, his voice low and tight. That's what this show is about. You make people feel welcome, only to tear them down for the audience. And then you laugh it off like it's nothing. Graham tilted his head slightly. And you still came here, knowing all that. Why? That question landed like a punch. Harry blinked, clearly caught off guard. His lips parted, struggling for a moment to respond. But the anger didn't go away. I came because I thought maybe this would be different. He finally spat. I thought maybe you'd treat me like a person, not a tabloid headline. Graham's smile tightened, but his tone stayed controlled. I've treated you exactly the same as every other guest who's sat here. No better, no worse. You're the one acting like the rules shouldn't apply to you. Harry's fists clenched on his knees. Don't give me that sanctimonious crap, he snapped. You think you're better than the tabloids because you say it with a joke, but you're not. At least they're honest about what they are. There was a ripple in the audience. A few people gasped softly at that line. Graham's brow furrowed, and for the first time, his voice lost a bit of its smoothness. Worse? He repeated. You're saying I'm worse than the people who chased your mother to her death? That crossed a line. Harry stood up suddenly, his face flushed with rage. Don't you dare bring my mother into this, he shouted. His voice echoed through the studio like a thunderclap. Don't you dare. Even Graham leaned back slightly, caught off guard by the intensity. The other guests froze completely, their eyes darting between the two men. Nobody dared to move or speak. Harry, Graham began again, calmer but firmer now. You've spent years bringing up your mother's name when it suits your story. But the moment someone else mentions her, it's suddenly off limits. Isn't that a bit of a double standard? Harry's chest heaved. He was glaring down at Graham with clenched teeth. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it. Graham pressed, still seated, still in control. Help me understand. Help the audience understand. You keep saying you want the truth to be heard. So say it. But don't stand there and act like every hard question is some kind of attack. Harry let out a bitter laugh and shook his head. You really think this is about the questions? You think this is journalism? This is just a performance. A setup. You don't care about truth. You don't care about people. You just want a reaction. You want ratings. You want me to squirm. Graham's mouth thinned into a line. He didn't respond right away, but his gaze didn't leave Harry's. That's an interesting idea, he said finally. But maybe the only one making you squirm is you. And that was the final straw. Harry's composure shattered. His voice rose, the sharp edge of his accent cutting through the air. You think this is a game, don't you? You think this is just a bit of fun for the cameras. You think people's lives are something for you to poke at and twist into entertainment. He stepped toward the host's desk now, eyes blazing. Well, congratulations, Graham. You got what you wanted. But let me tell you something, this isn't a joke. This isn't a game. You're playing with people's lives, and you don't even care. You call yourself a host, a journalist, whatever. He continued, voice shaking with fury. But all you are is another bully with a microphone and a crowd. The audience was completely silent. No laughter, no whispers, just the hum of studio lights and Harry's angry breathing. Even the air felt heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then, for the first time, Graham's tone dropped to something cold and quiet. If that's how you feel, Harry, he said slowly, then maybe you shouldn't have come. Because no one forced you into that chair. You chose to sit there. You chose to speak. And now, just because the questions don't suit you, I'm the bully? Harry leaned forward over the desk, his voice dropping to a low, bitter hiss, but still caught perfectly by the microphones. You don't deserve to sit there, he said, venom in his tone. You don't deserve to talk about people like me. You're a parasite. You invite guests on just to humiliate them, to tear them down, so you can feel bigger. The air in the room was thick with silence. Graham didn't move, though his jaw flexed slightly. He stood slowly, rising to match Harry's height, and stared straight into his eyes. Neither of them looked away, their standoff stretching long and tense. Maybe, Graham finally said, his voice steady and low. You should ask yourself why you feel so small in the first place. That was it, the final spark that lit the fire. Harry tore the microphone off his jacket and slammed it onto the desk. The sharp sound made the entire audience flinch. His voice boomed, full of fury and pain. That's it. I'm done. You think you can drag me, my wife, and my family through the mud and call it entertainment? You think you're clever? You think you're better than everyone you mock on this stage? Well, you're not. He turned now, facing the audience, eyes scanning the silent crowd. His voice shook with rage, but it was loud and clear. And you sit there, laughing along while he tears people to shreds. Do you feel proud? Do you feel good about yourselves? Is this fun for you? No one answered. The room was frozen. Then Harry turned back to Graham, voice louder than ever. You're exactly what's wrong with this country, this world. You dress up cruelty as wit and call it a career. Well, keep it. I'm done playing your game. And with that, he turned sharply and stormed toward the exit. The cameras followed as his footsteps echoed through the studio. His back was straight, fists clenched at his sides, his walk stiff with anger. The audience still didn't move, stunned into silence. Behind the desk, Graham remained standing. His expression was unreadable, but his hands rested lightly on the edge of the table. The studio door slammed shut behind Harry with a heavy, final thud. The audience didn't react. Not a clap. Not a sound. For a few long, breathless seconds, it was like time had stopped. The only sound was the fading echo of Harry's boots down the hall beyond the stage. The guests still sitting on the famous red sofa looked at one another with wide eyes, unsure whether to stay seated or quietly slip away. The camera stayed locked on Graham, who stood completely still, hands on the desk, staring at the door Harry had just exited through. Then, slowly, he straightened his jacket, let out a long, quiet breath, and turned to face the audience. His signature dry smile reappeared, but now it carried a colder edge. Well, he said, the word dry and pointed. That was festive. The audience let out a shaky ripple of nervous laughter, finally breaking the long silence. A few people clapped, hesitantly. Graham raised a hand, signaling for quiet, his tone now more serious than before. Let me say something, he began, scanning the audience, then looking directly into the camera. Clearly, tonight went in a direction none of us expected, least of all me. But here's the thing. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been doing this job a long time, he continued, his voice even but deliberate. In that time, I've had everyone sit on that couch, rock stars, world leaders, actors, authors. People who've done incredible things. Some are charming, some are difficult. But all of them, human. He tapped the desk lightly. What we do here is ask questions. That's it. Sometimes they're easy. Sometimes they're hard. But they're questions the public deserves to hear. That's not bullying. That's not cruelty. That's conversation. And if someone can't handle that, maybe they shouldn't sit in this chair. A few more people clapped, louder now, but Graham waved it down with a faint smile. I have nothing but sympathy for what Harry's gone through, he said, his voice softening just slightly. For what he faced as a child, and what he still endures today. Then his tone sharpened again. But sympathy doesn't mean someone is above criticism, especially when they choose to be in the spotlight. And let's be clear, he chose this. He leaned forward slightly, eyes focused. What you just saw, that wasn't me attacking him. That was him unraveling in front of all of us. That wasn't cruelty from me. That was a man so determined to control the story that he couldn't even tolerate being asked about it. And that says more about him than it does about me. There was murmuring from the audience now, some nodding, some clapping again. Graham looked down briefly, then back into the camera lens. And to Harry, he added, if you're watching this later, I truly wish you and your family peace. But if you come here to tell your story, don't expect me, or anyone else, to just sit here and nod and smile. Because that's not truth. That's theater. He gave a faint shrug, then sat down, calmly picking up his cue card again. Well, Graham said with a touch of dry humor, that was Prince Harry, everyone, for about 15 minutes. The audience laughed, this time a bit more freely, the tension finally easing just a little. Graham glanced toward the red sofa, where the remaining guests looked visibly relieved. The mood was shifting back to normal, slowly. Coming up next, he added, gesturing lightly to the others, we'll be joined by someone who doesn't mind answering questions, or at least hasn't walked out yet. The camera zoomed out slightly as Graham chuckled softly, casually flipping through his cards like nothing had happened. But his slight smirk hinted that the moment wasn't quite over. He looked straight into the camera one last time, his expression playful but firm. And for anyone at home upset by what you've just witnessed, don't be, he said smoothly. Because truth has a funny way of revealing itself, whether we like it or not. And tonight you saw it unfold in real time. He leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms in a relaxed gesture, the studio lights shining down on him as the applause swelled again, this time with more confidence. And that's how it ended, an unforgettable night on the Graham Norton show where Prince Harry stormed off, leaving behind a shocked crowd and a host who stood his ground. The kind of moment that will be talked about for years to come. If you enjoyed this inside look at one of the most intense talk show moments ever aired, don't forget to hit that like button. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Did Graham go too far? Or was Harry the one who lost control? And of course, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more behind-the-scenes breakdowns just like this. Thanks for watching. And remember, truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth hearing.